live on a recorded podcast, high above the sea-level offices of Steel Scorpion Sports. Here are your hosts, Jeff Miller and Mark Heflin. Welcome back. It's the Steel Scorpion Sports Free Agency Podcast. So, Mark, I'm here in San Diego. I assume you're in the lovely Bay Area.
I am indeed.
And it's been 2 weeks of free agency. We're coming at you on the eve of 2 full weeks free agency, Monday night. And with that, I wanted to launch us into a podcast that covers some of the news and notes, Mark, from the last couple of weeks. We can really get into a little bit deeper analysis of what's happened in free agency so far, a lot of trades as we'll discuss, but also get into the fantasy impact because that's really why people tune in. But before we do that, in the last couple of weeks, there have been some interesting news notes, tidbits that have happened. So I was shocked, and you being in the Bay Area, maybe you can give me some more insight into this, that the San Francisco 49ers had a linebacker retire in his prime. That's right. Patrick Willis retired. Shocking to me that a guy 29, 30 years old was going to retire, a guy at the top of his game. But then that was followed up a couple days later by a guy not even in his prime yet, retiring from linebacker from the San Francisco 49ers, and Chris Borland. What is going on up there?
Well, being in the Bay Area, the day after the news broke, people in the offices were pretty dejected and kind of sad that he was retiring. There was a lot of reaction to it, and I just kind of imagine what must have gone through Chris Borland's mind when he found out that Patrick Willis was retiring, because from what I've heard, he didn't know that was coming, and he basically filled in for Willis last year, so he was, kind of like he was going to be the permanent replacement. So when Willis announced his retirement, then everyone said, okay, well, it sucks that we're losing Willis, maybe an eventual Hall of Famer, but, we have Chris Borland who filled in quite admirably, and he'll be the starter in 2015 going forward. And then he's probably watching on reports going, oh, no, because he pretty much already knew at that point he was going to announce it, and then he had to do, a day or two of news cycles talking about Willis, but then also talking about him as the replacement, and him knowing that he's going to drop this bombshell. But I don't know, as far as league-wide implications, there's been a lot of reports written and discussions as far as, is this kind of just a one-off thing, or is this kind of a watershed moment that's going to be, a trend of things to come? Are we going to see more of this? Where do you lie on that continuum?
I'll say I'm leaning more towards it's a blip on the radar, but it's not going to have a huge impact in the near future. Maybe longer term, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, we'll start seeing a lot more guys that come in, play 3, 4, 5 years through one contract, get a little money out of it, and then retire because they don't want to get hurt. This, I don't think, is going to have much impact at all on 99% of the players in the league. You?
Yeah, I pretty much agree with that, though I do think, it is causing some conversations. I think it hopefully got the attention of the league offices. They should, this should be something that definitely concerns them, and in fact, they issued a press release a day or two afterwards, so it's obviously something that they felt they needed to respond to. When Jake Walker retired, there was no reaction. When Jason World from the Steelers retired, there was no reaction. But when you have a guy who's 24 and has played in the league for 1 year, did quite well, and was going to be, one of the next, linebacking stars, and then he retires and he says, for health and safety concerns, and he didn't even have any injury issues last year. He didn't have a concussion. He was just proactively retiring because he was concerned down the road. So the NFL had to issue a statement. So they're obviously on their radar. They're concerned. And I do think it's going to cause good conversations in NFL offices as far as, what more do we need to do? Do we need to come up with better helmets that, decrease the likelihood of concussions? But then I think it's also going to cause discussions in, homes across America of parents that have kids that are maybe playing middle school or high school football, and at least have that discussion, is this something that we, want to continue in, or maybe try to steer their sons towards baseball or track or what have you. So I think it's not going to be a huge impact right now, But like you said, I think down the road it may start to be a little bit more common.
Yeah, and I think that's the bigger fear for the NFL. It's not that suddenly 25 more guys retire today, because that's not happening. It's not even 25 guys retiring next year, because that's not happening. 5 years down the road, it probably isn't happening. What they have to fear is that parents are sitting at home, hear this news, heard the Patrick Willis news, heard about some Wes Welker concussions. They hear all the, just on the periphery, the noise of concussions, and starts, like you said, steering their kids away from football. Because that's really where it's going to have an impact, is if kids today that are 8, 9, 10 are steered away from football when they get to college age. Now you're talking 10 years down the road, they don't play football. They're doing something else. There are less guys that are really good football players in college, less good football players for the NFL to draft. The game suffers because, if you put you and I out there, while it is football, I don't know that people will watch. But if you put really good athletes out there, people will watch. So that's, I think, the NFL's biggest fear.
Yeah, definitely. And it's, definitely something that they need to worry about a little bit. And I think it did get their attention. We'll kind of see what they do going forward to, try the game safer.
Something else they did new, Mark, that's not so much for the safety of the game, but something that they did to try and enhance careers and prolong careers and give veterans a additional chance at staying in the league. The first ever Veterans Combine was held this week. I know you were probably there with your stopwatch, although it wasn't in the Bay Area, so I guess you would have had to travel. But it was probably on the NFL Network, so that would have been exciting to watch, because I know you love the regular rookie combine, so you probably loved this Veterans Combine, right?
You're not going to believe this. I'm actually going to confident fact. I actually did watch it. I noticed that there was I think I occurred throughout the day, but then they put together a 1-hour package of highlights and interviews. It ran last night at 5 p.m. Pacific on NFL Network. I actually taped it, watched it later. Now, I wasn't watching it intently and taking notes and everything. I was kind of doing some other stuff in the background and just had it on. But I got to say, from what I saw and from what I read this morning as well from Peter King, it sounded like the event was pretty much a bust. There were around 107 veterans that were there, most of which ran pretty slow times. A lot of them were running like 4.7s, 4.8s, or even in the 5s. In fact, even Felix Jones, who was, known for his speed coming out of Arkansas not that long ago, and in the 4.8s, and he basically said, well, I guess my career is over. So I don't know if it was just a slow track or everyone has just been sitting on the couch for the last couple of years and not practicing their sprints. But not only the fact that people were running slow, but people that have been out of the league for, in some cases, just 1 year, in some cases, 2 to 3 years. But they just, for one thing, they made the players pay to actually show up, which seems kind of ridiculous since the NFL is, just printing money. I'm not sure why you're making these guys pay, other than the fact that they were afraid that, people off the street might come up and try out. But I get the intent. I think that it's good intentions of trying to, get these guys in front of the teams. And it's easier for the teams to come in one place instead of, having to arrange visits with some of these guys. But the teams in general are, they're turning over rocks. They're doing everything they can to find players. Colts, for example, are signing guys out of the CFL. They signed a rugby player from New Zealand. Like, teams are already doing everything they can. They're spending millions of dollars scouting college players. They're flying across the country, watching college games all throughout the season. They're doing every single thing they can to find new talent. If these guys are unemployed, they're unemployed for a reason.
Yeah, and I do think it's a disservice to them that it happens 2 weeks into free agency as well, because, let's be honest, if this happens right after the rookie combine and before free agency, maybe it's not going to help too many of them, but maybe 1 or 2 extra guys might make the radar of somebody that goes, yeah, if we don't get these first 3 guys we're targeting in free agency, we should grab this guy just as a depth player. But you already grabbed your depth players. People have already been signing guys for 2 weeks, so even if a guy had a decent combine today, if it wasn't a standout combine, you weren't going to get signed because everybody already has players that they've been scouting. Like you said, they found guys all over the world, and even if you piqued their interest minimally, like you could be the 70th guy on the roster, they probably already have 70 guys, and it's not worth the effort to get you.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. As far as the timing of it, I think part of it is due, because of the owners' meetings that are taking place in Phoenix. So it was a time that everyone was there together. But in that case, do it as part of the actual rookie combine. Either do it the day before the rookie combine starts, or the day after the rookie combine is over, and you'll already have all of the scouts there anyway. And then, like you said, it takes place before free agency, and at least these guys have a chance. Versus now, when all the main free agents have already been signed.
Yeah, I think you tag it on like the day at the end of the rookie combine because the rookie combine is really the exciting part, and that goes at the end. But it still would give the NFL Network a day of packaging. I also thought, like you, I couldn't believe they made people pay to be in this because as you said, they're printing money, and they made a highlight package out of it. They probably showed some of it live at some point of a day or something. They had commercials. I assume they made some money by having this thing, and then they charged people to be in it. That's just ridiculous. Come on, NFL.
Yeah, that is bad. And they could still limit it to people that, they wanted to, because I heard they had 107, there were more than 107 wanted in, but had some kind of, standard of something as far as whether or not they would accept that they would be there. And you could still do that without payment. Like if you and I wanted to say, hey, I want to try out for the NFL team, we could still say, oh, did you play college? Have you ever played it down in the NFL? Like, oh, okay, you don't qualify. Like, yeah, to make people pay, I don't get it.
Yeah, and honestly, they invite rookies to the rookie combine, right? They don't have 600 rookies show up because if you're not invited, you don't get in. Same thing can go for the veterans. I don't see why it's such a problem. Like, wow, I don't want to open this up for random people to show up and say that they're going to try out. It's not a tryout. It's an invite-only combine. Simple as that. But I guess the other issue, now that the Veterans Combine is done, and well, actually, Mark, before we jump off that topic, I believe there have been some signings out of the Veterans Combine. Is that correct?
I saw two today. The Cardinals, and I almost wonder, and this is kind of the conspiracy theorist in me, I almost wonder if, Goodell or someone in the NFL kind of told the teams, not like hard pressure, but just kind of like a nudge, hey, hey, if we want this thing to have been successful at all, or if we want this to happen again in the future, we kind of need a team or two to sign someone from this thing. And we can't have this whole day happen and broadcast it and talk about it, and then nothing comes out of it. So I bet there was something along those lines. Now, interestingly, the first signee from this thing was the Cardinals, which was held locally there in Phoenix. They signed a wide receiver who, honestly, I've never heard of. So I don't expect that we'll hear a lot of him. He might not even make the roster this fall, most likely. And then later today, the Colts signed a cornerback. He played for Arizona State, another Arizona connection. And he graduated in 2013. He was an undrafted agent. He was with one team. I don't remember which. Played a few games, and then was out of football in 2014. And I don't even remember his name. So there's been two signings so far. From the package last night on NFL Network, they said, there were some name players there. Jamal Anderson was a first-round draft pick of the top 10 first-round draft pick of the Falcons back in 08, 09, 2010, somewhere in there. And there were some big-name running backs. There was Felix Jones. There was Michael Bush, of course, from the Raiders and Bears for a few years. And then Mikel Lashore of the Lions, who in their opinion, he had the best workout of the running backs. But so far, none of them have been signed.
Very interesting, or not so interesting. We'll have to see, like you say, if what Peter King and others are reporting comes out to be true, where this may or may not survive. If they're going to make it survive, I think, like we said, let's move it up. Let's have it near the regular combine, and let's do something that maybe enhances their chances of getting signed. And who knows? I don't know if it's worth it or not, but good for you, NFL. One other bit of a news has come out in the last few days, Mark, and it's back to a topic we talked about on our last podcast, the stadium issues. It's come to light now that Stan Kroenke, in his Inglewood Stadium proposal, is planning to build it for two teams in response to the Carson Stadium proposal to have two teams there, the Raiders and Chargers. So a lot of intriguing LA stories still going. approvals from city councils being fast-tracked and other things. We'll see how this goes. I will say I'm skeptical of the Rams being able to move there, only because the city of St. Louis appears to be willing to help build a stadium. Do you think Goodell's going to walk away from a city that's willing to put up money to build a stadium?
It would be hard to, but it's interesting with Kroenke of the Rams. Heard about his stadium design, which is built to potentially host two teams. In fact, it would have two home team locker rooms. It would have two sets of owner suites, etc. But then I also report that he's building it that way, but his preference is that only the Rams play there. He wants it to be just a Rams-only stadium, even though the NFL has said that they see LA as a two-team market. And then at the owners' meetings today, Robert Kraft said that he sees two teams in LA as early as 2016. So it's going to be, a few years ago, like the Vikings might be one of those teams, and then now they're getting a brand new stadium that they will move into next year, 2016. Now the Rams look like a viable candidate, though, like you said, the city of St. Louis is trying to save them. The Chargers and the Raiders, of course, have been discussed, but both of those cities are in discussion as far as they can do. But I think those two situations are probably, at least to me, look kind of the least bleak, or the most bleak, I guess, as far as being able to stay in those cities. As you know, San Diego, Qualcomm Stadium is, to put it bluntly, crap. And same with the Raiders. Their stadium is awful. I've been there for A's games. It's horrible. They have issues with the locker room, floods with sewage.
I was going to say, San Diego has never had sewage floods in Qualcomm, so it might be a bad stadium, but you can't call it a piece of crap, because that's reserved for O.co.
Where they literally do have crap in the locker rooms. Yeah, it's bad situation. So the Chargers and the Raiders either need to get new stadiums in their respective cities, or they need to move, because the places they're playing in now aren't places where NFL teams should be playing.
No, I agree. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I think we're still a long way off, and I know those owners all come out and chime in, and maybe we could have as many as two teams playing there in 2016. Where would they even play in 2016? I mean, the Coliseum, the Rose Bowl, UCLA is not going to go for that, so I don't believe when they say that. I think this is just more smoke to push the markets to give new stadiums to the Raiders, Chargers, and Rams. Maybe 2017, we'll see. But, yeah, it's interesting that it's finally gaining some traction with some stadium proposals. But enough on stadiums. I think we'll have a couple years to discuss that on podcasts. So let's get to something that's much more interesting and more relevant to today, and that would be the free agency. Now, Mark, there's a little description I want to give you of free agency, because you go into free agency and there are a lot of players out there, right? There are many players at every position, and I look at it like, what the agent is? The agent is like the guy that goes to the Hollywood studio and pitches a movie, because he's pitching his client. He might not be the best cornerback out there, but he's only got to find one sucker to buy it. It's like if you were going to make a movie called Get Hard, which has to be the stupidest premise to a movie I've ever seen. And by press, I mean the 85 commercials I've seen of it in the last 2 days. And yet somehow the writer or his agent was able to get that in front of a studio exec and say, oh, this is going to be great. And somebody bought it. So it's very similar on the free agent market. I like to think that the agent is sitting in front of an owner. He's like, oh, man, you know what you need? Ryan Fitzpatrick. And somehow the owner goes for it.
I've seen those Get Hard commercials. Well, from watching March Madness, I think I've seen that commercial 117 times. Usually for comedy movies, I kind of have the worry that, you watch the commercial on TV and you're like, well, I've probably just seen all the funny parts of the movie, because it's happened to me many times before. You see a commercial, oh, that looks funny, you laugh at the commercial. You go to the movie, and literally you saw all the funny parts in the commercial, and so it's not nearly as funny the second time, and there's no other parts to laugh at. The problem with Get Hard is, I don't even laugh at the commercial. Even the parts that they're trying to say are funny in the commercial aren't funny to me. So,
Right.
I was looking at the.
If those are the highlights of the movie, if those are the high points, the big punchlines, this will be the worst film of all time.
Yeah, on a scale of 1 to 10 of desirability, of a 10 being I'm going to light up for that movie the night before, and a 1 being you couldn't pay to me to see that movie, I think my desire to see that movie is like a negative 23. So.
And yet you're still twice as likely to see it as I am.
Yeah, I will be nowhere near that movie. I may not even go to a movie theater while it's playing in theaters, just for the, I don't even want to be close to it. I don't want to risk that whatever I go to the movie theater, all the other movies are sold out except that one, and I'm not going to risk it.
Wait, you don't think that'll be sold out? All right, but to circle all the way back to my point. So free agency is that big sales job, and all you have to do is find one suitor. And we saw that in free agency this year with a number of strange contracts that you probably looked at and you thought, wow, they paid that player a lot of money and I'm not sure why. Or, wow, they signed that player and that seemed odd to me. So I think to really dive into free agency, though, we're going to have to include trades this year. Normally, I would say that that's such a meaningless part of the NFL that you don't even have to discuss it, right? And then Chip Kelly came along. And suddenly, trades are no longer this odd thing that happens in basketball and baseball and once in a while in football. It's something that happens on an hourly basis on the first day of free agency.
I liked it. Yeah, it shook things up. Usually just saying, okay, which players are going to be free agents. You kind of know which players are going to be moving, or at least potentially could move if they don't re-sign with the current teams. But then you start seeing LaShawn McCoy, Sam Bradford, Nick Foles, Jimmy Graham, like these big names. It's like, whoa, hey, I kind of like this.
At first,
it's a little bit more interesting.
I know. At first, I thought you were sending me a lot of trades from your fantasy league. Hey, what do you think about Jimmy Graham getting traded? And I'm like, well, if you need a tight end on your fantasy team, that's great. And then you're like, no, I mean to the Seahawks. What? And hey, what do you think about swapping QBs or getting the top rusher from 2 years ago in a trade? This does sound like fantasy owners are suddenly taking over the GM roles in the NFL. But like you, I'm in favor of that. Let's have more trades. Liven things up.
Yeah, and I think we will start to see more. I think they start to realize that it's a good way to get talent, and it's not just talent acquisition through free agency or the draft, but there's a third avenue. Why not take advantage of all three? So, you've got to look for deals that make sense, but yeah, you definitely need to add trades to your roster building repertoire.
And if you are a GM out there, and let's say you're not the Philadelphia GM, would you go into the draft and you're in the third or fourth round and you don't really know who to take? Would you just grab somebody from Oregon knowing that Chip Kelly's going to call you and want to trade for him in a year?
It would not be the road. I'll say that.
It's like the, is it Ikpe Okpo or something, the cornerback?
I know. I don't even want to try to.
I feel bad for him. He's hurt, so he's not going to go in the first or second round, maybe. Maybe second round, maybe not. Maybe third round, you grab him, and, when he's healthy, hey, Chip's going to call you next year and be like, I want him.
But by the way, how much longer could this strategy last? Because Chip's been in the NFL for 2 years now. This coming year will be his third, so we're almost getting to the end of players that he actually had a chance to coach. Like, 2 years from now, when he has no connection to the players on the roster, is he still going to just, knowing that, his guy, Helfrich, stayed and coached, is he just going to think that, well, I guess he's still going to have some inside knowledge. He probably still, talks with Helfrich on a weekly or monthly basis, but he's not going to have seen them in practice. He's still going to have the same connection to the Ducks going forward.
True. I mean, this year and next, probably definitely the best time to take advantage of that strategy of draft Oregon players and trade them to Chip Kelly. After that, it's probably he'll draft them or you just won't know who they are.
Yeah.
But be that as it may, now that we know that Chip Kelly is truly a riverboat gambler and wheeler dealer, what did you think of free agency? Were there any moves that jumped out at you and said, slap me silly, I can't believe that just happened? And were there any then furthering that you thought, wow, that's going to have a huge fantasy impact to the good?
Well, in fact, I put together a list. I looked at all the different free agents and trades, so the players that moved via trade, moved via free agency, and then I also looked at players that were free agents but signed with their own team. And I came up with a list of the 5 that had the biggest positive impact from a fantasy football perspective, since that's we mostly focus on our fantasy football site. So I looked at it from that perspective. There were some names that, big names that moved, but I didn't necessarily put them in the top 5. C.J. Spiller is going from the Bills to the Saints. We'll see. They still have Ingram there, so he kind of a change of pace, maybe a third down back. I don't know if it's going to be a huge change for him. Percy Harvin went from the Jets to the Bills. He's kind of almost not completely fantasy irrelevant, but he's pretty far down the list at this point. Obviously, one of the big names, LaShawn McCoy, going from the Eagles to the Bills. I don't have him in my top 5. I think it's going to be a little bit of a wash. He's going to one of the really bad offensive lines from rushing, at least in 2014. Now, they may draft some offensive linemen. They already signed Richie Eagle. Things can fluctuate a fair amount from year to year, so maybe it'd be better than they were in 2014. But at least statistically, going to not a good offensive line for rushing, but at the same time, he's going to a coach who loves to run the ball, and he's probably going to get 350 or more carries, as well as a fair amount of receptions. So in the end, I said, that might be kind of a wash for McCoy. I also looked at players like, Randall Cobb, the free agent. A lot of people were thinking that he might get a big payday. He might go to the Raiders. He might go to the Jaguars, or a few other teams are considered. He ended up staying with the Packers. Now, staying with the Packers is obviously much better than if he had gone to the Raiders or the Jaguars. And if you're a dynasty owner, you're certainly happy to be staying with the Packers. But from looking from 2014 to 2015, again, he doesn't make my top 5 because his situation just stayed the same. It just happens to be better than it would have been if he left. So, looking at my top 5, number 5, I have Jordan Cameron. He was on the Browns, and he went to the Dolphins. So he was on a team that, who knows who their quarterback is, right? They had Hoyer, they had Manziel last year. Not even sure who's going to be starting for them this year. McCown, Manziel, someone in the draft, I don't know. But he's going to the Dolphins. So he's definitely upgraded at QB. He's got Ryan Tannehill. They have their second year of a new offensive system under Bill Lazor. So I think he improved there. I think he's in a better situation. Definitely better quarterback play. At number 4, I have Andre Johnson. And you could argue maybe even higher for him. Again, another situation where he didn't have great quarterback play last year. He had a poo-poo hodgepodge platter of Fitzpatrick and Savage and Mallet, and there was even a 4th guy.
I believe it was T.J. Yates, maybe? Is he still there?
No, Keenum.
Case Keenum, that was it. Yes.
Yeah. So I think he got passes from 4 different QBs last year, and yet he still had a decent season. He had like 85 receptions, like around 1,000 yards, maybe 900 something. And so now he's going to, arguably, one of the top 3 or 4 quarterbacks in the entire league. A passing offense. He should definitely improve from what he had last year, not only just from a QB standpoint, but from a volume standpoint, and probably get more red zone opportunities as well. So his situation from 14 to 15 definitely improved. Now, number 3, you could argue that maybe I shouldn't include him for this because I'm still not sure he's going to be fantasy relevant, and the situation for his team is most likely going to change after the draft. But as of now, Darren McFadden, he goes from the Raiders to the Cowboys. He goes from a team that is pretty much inept and is usually trailing in the second half and not running as much, to a team that is 12-4 last year, so they have a lot of second half leads. They're running the ball more, and it goes to almost inarguably the best rushing offensive line in the NFL. So even though McFadden gets injured a lot, even though he's had 3.4 yards per carry over the last couple of years, by going from the Raiders to the Cowboys, as of right now, he's third on my list. But I grant you that they will probably, either, hey, maybe they might add Felix Jones back to the team, but they'll probably draft someone either in the first or second round as a running back. And McFadden is probably going to be the number 2 guy. He might replace Joseph Randle in that. It's not only not impossible, it's actually quite possible. So I won't go so far as to say probable, but it's definitely within the realm of possibility for sure.
All right, so maybe he, before injury, he's at 3. After injury, which is any day now, he's off your list. Okay, so what number 2?
Yes. At number 2, I have Sam Bradford. So again, speaking of injury, good segue. You didn't even know that it was going to be Bradford, but segue nonetheless with injuries. Bradford, has, I think, he tore the same ACL. I think it was in the same knee.
Yes.
Tore the same ACL twice.
Not good.
So, yeah, not good. So he clearly has some injury situations. So Chip Kelly, using Moneyball approach, he thinks that the new inefficient market is, players that are coming off injuries, apparently. So he thinks that he can turn Bradford into a star. He loves Bradford. He thinks that Bradford ran somewhat similar offense at Oklahoma as what he's doing with the Eagles. So we'll see. Bradford definitely put up huge stats as a Sooner, but it also looks like, the Eagles plan on running the ball a lot because they have DeMarco Murray and Ryan Matthews. So, and Bradford, he didn't have great receivers in St. Louis. You could argue that he may not have great receivers in Philly right now because they did lose Jeremy Maclin. They still have Jordan Matthews. They still have Riley Cooper. They're probably going to add at least one receiver in the draft. There's already been talk about, Devin Smith out of Ohio State or Nelson Aguilar out of USC. But by moving from St. Louis and kind of a rushing offense, more of a conservative offense under Jeff Fisher, to a Chip Kelly offense, that puts you in my top 5. And at number 1, this is kind of maybe under the radar, but Owen Daniels was tight end on the Baltimore Ravens, a team that likes to run the ball a lot, and with a good but not great quarterback, Joe Flacco, now going to the Denver Broncos. They lose Julius Thomas, and Owen Daniels. There are some that say that he might be fighting for the number 1 role with Virgil Green, who's still there, but just based on experience alone, and Kubiak, who was offensive coordinator with the Ravens, now coming over to be coach of the Broncos. I'm saying that I think that Owen Daniels will definitely be the number 1 tight end in Denver for the season, and if that's the case, you look at what Julius Thomas has done the last couple of years. I don't necessarily think that Owen Daniels will be getting 12 touchdowns a year like Julius Thomas has the last couple of years, but going Broncos to from the Ravens to the Broncos, I have Owen Daniels number 1 on my list as far as the best fantasy improvement from 2014 to 15.
Yeah, don't forget Jacob Tammy's also gone from the Broncos. So. Yeah,
I didn't factor that in too much. Jacob Tammy has never been more than a 20 reception guy in the Broncos, but yeah, he's not there as well.
But you have to replace those 20 receptions, and maybe Virgil Green replaces those, but then you have to replace all of Julius Thomas's receptions. So,
this is true.
Like you said. Now, I will say Jacob Tammy, I think he went to Atlanta. He might end up on this list at number 9 or 10 because they're still looking for the fill-in for Tony Gonzalez. I believe they signed Tony Moiaki and Tammy in the same day and hope one of them will be the next tight end pass-catching threat for them. So, one of those guys could actually do something in fantasy. I would be terrified to draft Moiaki after his injury history, but you clearly mentioned that with Run DMC and Bradford, injuries didn't stop you from putting people on the list.
So you're saying the Falcons have already given up on Levine Toliolo?
I believe when they couldn't pronounce the name, they gave up on it. So, yes, sadly. So, yeah, that's a pretty good list. I thought you did it.
I'll throw out 2 more.
Okay.
I'm going to throw out 2 more honorable mentions. Frank Gore going from the Niners to the Colts. I don't think it's a huge improvement. I think his role will be kind of the same, but I do think it's an improvement versus if he had stayed with the Niners, which after the season, he's been a Niner his whole life, and he was saying that he would like to return. If he had returned to the Niners versus now being on the Colts, he's definitely in a better situation than had to return to the Niners because they would definitely try to start using Carlos Hyde a lot more and limiting Gold's carries. But Indianapolis, I think he is going to be a 15 to 20 carry back. And then Shane Vereen going to the Patriots, to the Giants. He's just in a better situation as far as I think he'll get more carries and more receptions versus with the Patriots. They have such a muddled backfield. I'm looking at it from a fantasy perspective. It's kind of hard to start Shane Vereen when you never know Belichick if he's going to give 20 carries to Jonas Gray one week or LeGarrette Blount the next, or Stephen Ridley is not going to do it this year. Was injured. They're not going to be there this coming year and was injured last year, but it was definitely a crazy situation with Patriots running backs. I think it'll be a little bit more defined and easier to start him in your fantasy league in 2015.
Yeah, the only other name I'd throw out is Charles Clay going to Buffalo. Now, you said Jordan Cameron went to the Dolphins. Now, Clay leaves the Dolphins. He leaves Tannehill, but they didn't utilize the tight end as well as I thought they could have. I think sometimes they tried to force it to Mike Wallace, who's no longer there. And so now going to a Rex Ryan offense, tight end is really used as the main pass catcher in a Rex Ryan offense. Maybe they'll learn to incorporate Sammy Watkins, but he also has to have a QB, which would make it useful. But he'll be the red zone target most likely, so maybe he has some value that he didn't last year.
Yeah, he gets a value effect from system standpoint, like you said, but then he gets a corresponding downgrade going from Tannehill to, who knows, Matt Castle, EJ Manuel, Tyrod Taylor, don't know, but any one of those three.
Did you say Matt Castle?
Downgrade from Tannehill.
Matt Castle could make the list that I'm going to go over. Because
I don't know how the situation could get worse because he didn't even play last year.
Well, sadly, he did not make the list. So sorry, Matt. I apologize, but you weren't even good enough to make the bottom 5 moves of the free agent period. Or maybe you should be happy you didn't. Either way. But similar to you, Mark, I did take into account all the moves that happened, the changes in situation, and the impacts of re-signing or trades. So I came up with a list of 5 moves I think are going to hurt the fantasy value of a player. So my number 5 is the flip of one of yours. I have Nick Foles going to the Rams. And I'll just say simply Chip Kelly to Jeff Fisher. Really all I need to say. Chip Kelly makes Nick Foles a viable NFL quarterback. He was probably 12th or 13th on the pecking order for draft, so he might have been a late starter or an early backup. You might have been playing him in tandem with somebody, going with a rotation. Going to St. Louis, a shaky line. They had multiple injuries to quarterbacks last year. Nick Foles, not the healthiest guy in the world, not the best weapons on the team. I don't like that fit at all, so bad luck to Nick Foles. Number 4, Brian Hartline going to the Browns. Now, there's a reason I put him on the list. He's leaving Miami. He was a pretty good security blanket for Tannehill, and he's going to a team, as you mentioned earlier, on the flip side with Cameron going down to Miami, where his quarterback could be Johnny Manziel, could be McCown, could be whatever draftable quarterback they find with their picks. But the real reason I put him on this list is the rumor was the New England Patriots offered him a contract. Maybe not as much as the Browns. Well, Brian Hartline, you go sign with the Patriots and you catch passes from Tom Brady for the next couple of years. When Brady retires, you're up for another contract. You'll get a big deal like Welker did. Instead, you go to the Browns, and we're pretty sure we're never going to hear from you again. So that makes number 4 on my list. Number 3, big name. It's Jimmy Graham going to the Seahawks. I don't love Jimmy Graham going to the Seahawks from a fantasy perspective because I think Jimmy Graham was a second-round pick as a New Orleans Saint. He was clearly one of the top 2 tight ends, probably the top volume tight end the last few years because Gronk was always getting hurt, but he's clearly one of the top 2 tight ends from fantasy over the past few years. But he's going to a run-first offense that likes to play defense. He's going to get some touchdowns. I know they want to use him as their red zone weapon. That's great. But his volume is going to be so far down compared to what he got in New Orleans, a pass-happy offense. I think he's still going to be a very talented tight end. Just from a fantasy perspective, his numbers won't support a top 2 or 3 round draft pick anymore. So that's a pretty big drop in my mind. Number 2 on the list, you mentioned him in an aside on one of your comments. Ryan Matthews, signing with Eagles. Ryan Matthews is in Philly. He's getting a physical. He's got the parameters of a contract worked out. Looks like he's going to be the replacement for LaShawn McCoy. Lo and behold, that same day as he's in Philly, they get DeMarco Murray. He hadn't signed his contract yet. I'm almost wondering why, at that point, you're Ryan Matthews. You don't at least call around some places and see if anybody else will get you as a starter. And the reason I put him second on this list is his fantasy value just went to nil. He was a starter in San Diego, so he was worth drafting, probably 6th roundish, but he was going to be the starter. So if you had him on your roster the few weeks he was healthy, he's a starting running back in the NFL. That's nice. You're only going to draft him now as a handcuff. I mean, at best he's the breather back. He's the change of pace back. Although they have Darren Sproles to do that, he's the guy that when DeMarco Murray gets hurt, not if, but when, he'll get some games. But then Ryan Matthews will get hurt. So I just don't see that Matthews has almost any fantasy value from a draftable standpoint anymore in the top half or 10 rounds of the draft. So any comments so far as I'm leading up to number 1?
Well, yeah, I'll say on Ryan Matthews, I thought it was interesting that, like you said, he had signed his contract, and then Marco signed, and then he still goes ahead and signs with the Eagles. I heard someone say, and I forget who said, that maybe it's kind of an admission by Ryan Matthews that he's either A, not sure that he himself is a starter, or that he knows that he's brittle enough that he feels more comfortable taking a backup role, getting a reduced amount of carries, and figures that he'll be able to stay healthier that way. And from a fantasy standpoint, I think I, in general, am not a big believer in the handcuff system, but I will say people that draft DeMarco Murray next year, they probably should look at getting Ryan Matthews a few rounds later, because Murray has his own industry, plus he had like 1 billion carries last year, so it's quite possible that he gets injured this year. If that's the case, if he goes down, then you probably are going to want Ryan Matthews in that Eagles offense.
Well, at least for the 3 weeks he's healthy.
Yes, exactly.
So you might want to draft Darren Sproles in the last round as well, or the second to last round, leaving your kicker for the last round.
Yeah.
All right, well, that leads up to number 1. Can I get a drum roll?
Well, before you do the drum roll, I have to say, I kind of made a rough list as well, and my top 2 guys you haven't even discussed yet. So I'm going to go ahead and throw them out there. I'm going to assume that your top guy is one of these 2 guys. I'll be really shocked if it's not one of them. But then I'm going to come back to you afterwards and ask how the other one isn't in your top 5. But those 2 guys for me are Julius Thomas and Jeremy Maclin.
All right, and neither one of them is my number 1.
Oh, my goodness.
This is going to be beautiful. My number 1, Brandon Marshall. How is he not in your top 2? Brandon Marshall goes from Jay Cutler at quarterback, like him or not. Jay Cutler, in a pass-happy Bears offense, threw the ball around all over, and he had Alshon Jeffrey on the other side, so you couldn't really double him all the time. He now goes to, well, let me just say 2 words. Geno Smith. Do I need to say anything else about his fantasy value?
I hear you, but I feel like Brandon Marshall's fantasy value is kind of already on the decline a little bit anyway. I mean, he had the injury last year. He's getting older.
He was drafted in the top 2 rounds last year in most every fantasy draft. I'll be surprised if he goes in the top 5 rounds this year. The argument to you that I'll give you on yours, Jeremy Maclin, last year, Jeremy Maclin was not drafted highly at all because most people didn't know.
Well, that's because he was coming off an injury.
He was coming back from an injury. So his value last year was pretty low. You got him late. He outperformed that. And now he's going to be the number 1 receiver with Alex Smith. It's not a great situation, but it's not a zero value situation. It's not Ryan Matthews, where he's now at backup. He's still the number 1 receiver on a team that actually runs a West Coast system. Andy Reid does like to throw the ball. It's just that Dwayne Bowe was his best receiver. And Dwayne Bowe, he's old. Dwayne Bowe had a great career in KC. Good for him. But it wasn't going to work out for him anymore. So Maclin's value doesn't go away. Whereas Brandon Marshall's value gets cut. Even though it was starting to decline in Chicago, it gets cut in half in New York.
Speaking of getting cut in half, how do you? You need to justify. How do you not have Julius Thomas? He goes from Peyton Manning to Blake Bortles.
Well,
Defend yourself.
I did factor in that Julius Thomas was hurt for half of last season. He only had 50 catches last year. So it's not like going to Jacksonville, he's not going to get 50. He's going to. I mean, he's going to be one of their best receiving options, if not the best receiving option. And in that division with mediocre defenses, he actually will probably catch a good number of balls, get a few touchdowns, even from Blake Bortles. And so comparable stats year on year, he's not going to be that different. It's just his ceiling has come down. So, we looked at it. You just threw that out with Brandon Marshall. You said, well, he was kind of falling down on his progression. Did Julius Thomas not fall flat on his face last year?
No, Julius Thomas had,
after week, I don't know, after week 8, did he have one
Yeah.
catch? I think it was 7 catches. And he did play in some of those games. He played in a number of games that he goose-egged. You knew if you had him, you started him because you heard Thomas was playing. That's horrid.
Yeah, no, after the ankle injury, he was not the same player. It was definitely not as good. But before that, it was pretty good.
I get it. I get where you're coming from, but I was looking at his stat line. I'm thinking the value you got out of Julius Thomas last year, it all happened in the first 5 games, but you ended up with a 50 catch, 800-yard, 9 touchdown guy. He could get those numbers in Jacksonville over 16 games.
I suppose.
Actually, I like him to get 50 catches. I think he'll get 80 catches down there. They don't have anybody else to throw to.
Well, they actually have decent receivers. They lost Cecil Shorts, but they still have Allen Robinson.
Justin Blackmon could be
Justin
back.
Blackmon comes back.
No, please, I was joking. Justin Blackmon is closer to, I think, jail than even, I don't know, anyone in the Cleveland organization. And that's saying something.
Well, they think that he's going to be back. Even if he's not, they still have Allen Robinson, Marquise Lee, Alan Hearns.
Yeah, I mean, those guys are nice. They're complimentary receivers, and I think they'll do okay. But if you're Blake Bortles, now you're going to be throwing the ball to Julius Thomas more than anyone else. And that's great. I think Julius Thomas is going to get a decent stat line. His touchdowns will probably go way down, but from a tight end position, he still may end up as one of the top 5 tight ends. That shows you how weak the tight end position is.
Blake Bortles, and maybe he'll get better from his rookie year to his second year. He was not that accurate as a rookie. So if you want to have Julius Thomas as your starting league, I highly recommend you find some fantasy league somewhere where you get points for targets, because Julius Thomas will have a buttload of targets. I'm not sure how many receptions that's going to translate into.
No, that's why they went and signed him, is because he's so much bigger. When the ball's off target, it's actually still close enough for him to catch. With those small, skinny guys that are running those out routes and things, Alan Hearns turns and the ball's a foot outside. He can't get to it. He's not big enough. Julius Thomas has a big wingspan. He'll get those.
Maybe we'll see. If you are brave enough to draft him as your starting tight end in your team, then all more power to you.
Well, I think I drafted someone from the Texans last year, so I'm brave enough.
Other names that I had DeMarco Murray 4 on my list. He's in a good offensive Eagles, but let's face it, he was running behind the number 1 rushing offensive line in football. And then
the only reason I didn't knock him down is because he's going to an innovative offensive mind, Chip Kelly, and maybe with Ryan Matthews, they'll keep him a little more fresh, not give him 657 million carries. So maybe he won't get hurt, and he'll be able to still get some touchdowns, because Chip Kelly likes to run the ball. People are confused and think it's a wide-open pass attack. He likes to run the ball. So I think Murray, it's not going to be the same, but, if he stayed in Dallas, he wasn't going to have the same year either. So I didn't want to put him in the top 5 just because I think his year is going to get worse wherever he plays.
Yeah. And then 2 honorable mentions that I had were Torrey Smith going from Joe Flacco to Colin Kaepernick. I already mentioned before. Flacco is a good but not great quarterback. I've mentioned my thoughts on Kaepernick in previous podcasts. I'm not impressed with him, so I think Torrey Smith has a downgrade there. And then Kenny Stills, speaking of trade, another trade that we forgot to mention, went from the Saints to the Dolphins. He goes from Drew Brees to Tannehill. Not bad. He's young guy. He's getting better, but Drew Brees is definite Hall of Famer. And he goes from an indoor fast track on turf to playing in Miami. So I think there's a little bit of a downgrade there.
Yeah, but he wasn't terribly fantasy relevant yet. He was fringe fantasy relevant, third type receiver on New Orleans. He was starting to come on, but I wouldn't say that's a huge drop for him because he wasn't that relevant. But
right, yeah, not a huge drop, but that's why it's just my honorable mention.
Franklin, the offensive tackle / guard from Denver, coming out to San Diego. One of the things that cost the Chargers last year was Rivers getting hit too much, and then he got injured and couldn't. The season kind of got away from them late in the year. So they beefed up the offensive line. That might make Phillip Rivers a sneaky play late as your 12th or 13th type quarterback, a guy that you might rotate in if you're not able to get one of the top QBs. So keep that in mind.
Yeah.
And with that, we're wrapped on free agency. So it's been quite exciting, I have to say, as we discussed earlier. All these trades, it felt more like a fantasy draft or, the new world of trades and signings and crazy moves. It was much better than our typical NFL season. I hope for the duration of this CBA it continues.
Yeah, I'm all for that. Trades are exciting.
All right, before we wrap, I want to give you a chance, Mark, to give me 1 minute of useful information that you've come up with. So we're not going to do a Miller's Minute this week, but why don't you give me a pop culture minute that you've come up with in the last, say, 2 weeks?
All right. For new show, I cannot recommend it highly enough. Usually new shows, it takes a little while to, build up who the characters are. You got to establish, where they are, who they know, kind of build it up a little while. This show, off the bat, I think it's only been maybe 6 episodes or so. I'm already willing to put it in my top 5 comedy sitcoms of all time. It's The Last Man on Earth. It airs Sunday nights on Fox. I love this show. I cannot speak highly enough about it. I watched it because the previews looked good, though I was interested to see how they could possibly make a recurring show with one guy in the show. And it may or may not stay one guy. I won't give too much away if you haven't seen any of it, but that it stars Will Forte from Saturday Night Live, so I always thought he was, very funny on Saturday Night Live, very underappreciated. He's very, very funny in this show. I look forward to it every Sunday night, every single episode of Laugh Out Loud, at least once. It's a great premise, and just the way that things develop, I guess I'll say. Very, very good show. I recommend, going online, finding episodes, watching them, getting caught up. It's just, like I said, I cannot speak highly enough about it. It's already in my top 10. Great, great show. Go watch it.
Well, it's very timely that you say this because I heard the ratings actually aren't doing very well after the first week or two. It's starting to slide in the ratings, and as you well know, new shows, if they don't stick quickly with the ratings, the networks are very apt to pull the plug on them because networks do that. And we've seen this before. Usually it's with the dramas that are actually complex and smart enough that most of America doesn't understand it. Sorry, America. But in this case, it's a comedy. If the ratings slide in the next couple weeks, you could see them not picking it up for the fall. So good that you brought that up. I haven't seen it. I'll take a look at it. And I'll be one of those late viewers.
Well, it's almost guaranteed to get canceled because of the fact that I like it. I can't tell you how many shows that I've watched. This is a really good, smart comedy or, drama. That's a good drama. And then it gets canceled. And yeah, you look back like Seinfeld debuted in 1989, I think. Horrible ratings. It was very slow to catch on. And if Seinfeld debuted today with the ratings it had, it would have not even made it to season 2. So, maybe networks should, think about that and learn a lesson. But yeah, I gotta say, watch it. Tell everyone you know to watch it. Let's get those ratings up. Very, very funny show.
All right, and with that, we are going to wrap this free agency podcast from Steel Scorpion Sports. Don't forget to go check out our website, steelscorpionsports.com. We're a better species of fantasy football. You can learn more about the multiplier, the mulligan, and our all-play format. Go check out our blog page, review our leagues, and look to join one of them this year. You'll see the different levels we have available. So reserve one of those spots for your pay leagues this year, and you won't be disappointed. We do podcasts all throughout the season. We inform people what's going on in the leagues, also across fantasy football. So join us every few weeks here in the off season, and then every week during the season. So I think, Mark, our next one will probably be a pre-draft podcast in a couple weeks as we warm up to the idea of Chicago for the NFL draft.
Yeah, I can't believe I looked at the calendar today. The NFL draft is 5 weeks from this Thursday, so I'm going to start counting down the days. It's one of my favorite times of the year, that Thursday, Friday, Saturday.
Yeah, well, it used to be one of my favorite Saturday, Sundays, and Friday, Saturday, Sundays.
Yeah.
But hey, whatever. I mean, Thursday, sure.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Roger Goodell. Thanks. But with that, we'll sign off. Signing off from San Diego, this is Jeff Miller.
Signing off from San Jose, this is Mark Eflin.
Talk to you later, sports fans.